It's my pleasure to welcome Jin Park, whose contribution to this volume is I see as part of her work as one of the contemporary Buddhist philosophers of, in our field. So the title of her contribution, The Gateless Barrier and the Locus of Truth, is the topic of our talk today. And the first question that I want to ask is, how did you come to study Buddhism or get into these topics, get into these issues?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Wendy. Thank you very much for having me here. And it's a really pleasure to discuss this chapter and my engagement with the Buddhist philosophy. So I think there are two sides, as you might have noticed in my chapter. I do a lot of intercultural philosophy, Buddhism, and Western philosophy. So my introduction to Buddhism started rather as a cultural component. I was born and grew up in South Korea, and my parents were Buddhist. But being Buddhist in old days in Korea does not mean that they go to Buddhist temples every Sunday or anything like that. It was more in the culture, and especially when I was a kid, my parents used to go to the mountain hiking. Korea has a lot of mountains. 75% of Korean peninsula is mountainous. So we would go to mountains on Saturday or Sunday and have lunch on top of the mountain. And on the way down, we will drop by Buddhist temples. As you may know, that a lot of Buddhist temples, traditional Buddhist temples in Korea, are on the mountains. They are beautiful. So we will drop by Buddhist temples and say hello to the Buddha and, pray for whatever you would like to pray for. Or during the Buddha's birthday, there was a big Lantern festival in downtown Seoul, and then my parents will take me to there, and then I remember watching all those beautiful lanterns and prayed. I don't know what I prayed for, but anyway, that was my introduction. And interestingly, sometimes I ask myself, when was the first time I actually got exposed to this serious study of Buddhism? Before I actually do it as an academic field of study, I don't remember. I don't remember when I first read Buddhism, but so that was cultural kind of encounter was my introduction to Buddhism. On the other hand, I read a lot of Western philosophy. Since I was a kid, for whatever reason, I was interested in the meaning of existence. I don't know why. And then also I was very much scared about death. I wanted to know what this life is all about. So I read a lot of philosophy books and literature, but I believe at that point that those books did not include Buddhism because Buddhism was a little bit more difficult in a way just to get direct into it. But when I read a lot of Western philosophies, I thought that the arguments, especially modern continental philosophy, argument didn't align with what I was thinking. So I thought that, well, philosophy is not my thing, right? I don't have a talent for philosophy. But then eventually I kind of get engaged with postmodernism and deconstruction. So you see that in my chapter, Merleau-Ponty or Jacques Derrida, and I realized that they have a lot of similarities with Buddhist philosophy. So since then, I really get into Buddhist philosophy seriously, Buddhist philosophy in a traditional sense, and also Buddhist philosophy as a kind of part of intercultural philosophy. So in a way, my introduction to Buddhism is a mixture of cultural exposure in South Korea, and also my curiosity or my desperate need to learn the truth of existence and my encounter with Western philosophy, which ironically lead to Buddhist philosophy.
Great. Yes, thank you. And I also want to say thank you for that book, Buddhism and Postmodernity. I appreciate it a lot, and I used it in a phenomenology seminar. And for readers or for listeners, it's an edited volume, so it includes Jim Park's work as well as the work of other philosophers engaging in similar topics. So it's a really rich volume, very densely packed and good to think with. So now we're focusing on this series, the readings in the Gateless Barrier, which has, as we've heard in previous interviews, and I recommend listeners to tune into those, has a multifaceted cultural life in China, Japan, and Korea. So I want to focus on complex questions that Jin raises in the course of her essay. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to refer to my notes because it's, I want to make sure I do justice to the kinds of philosophical questions she's raising. And as she just said, Buddhism is difficult. It's not, it's not when you're delving into both traditional and modern philosophical issues. It takes close attention, which is a recommendation for practice in the article. So I want to start with this phrase in the beginning that you bring up. We could call it a huato. The context of how something happened is as important as, if not more important than, what happened. So that's right at the beginning of your essay. And it's a theme for the essay, and it's also, I feel, a theme for the book. This series demands that readers engage with how truth arises contextually, historically, and also contentiously. So Guan stories, as you call them, are noted for short-circuiting explanatory impulses and undercutting truth as what we think we can point to, regardless of the indeterminable dynamics of causes and conditions, of what we think. And you take this up in your section, right answer, wrong answer, and questioning the answer, with regard to the famous koan that we will get a lot of discussion in these interviews. A monk asked Zhaozhou, case 1, does a dog have Buddha nature or not? And Zhaozhou said, woo, like a dog, woo. And you point out that there's a representational or truth correspondence right answer. Yes, of course, dog has Buddha nature. There's an authoritative answer, whatever the master says. But you ask, rather than seeking this confirmation or rightness, what are we being faithful to? What are we being true to when we ask for truth? How does truth arise? So when you spell out the conundrum that the truth of the Buddha nature of a dog is that there is a lack of essence. It's impossible to prove this referentially. Right and wrong don't work here. And this is also a theme we're hearing in other interviews. So how do you see and experience the third way that you mentioned, neither right nor wrong, questioning the question? How do you see that working?
Right. The third way, beyond the yes and no, right or wrong, it's a really complex kind of procedure that you need to get to the answer that you to the question that you asked. So first you asked the differences between how and what. And I think we are so much accustomed to think about what, which is which means a lot of different things in different situations. For example, we are obsessed with identity. So what is it? Who am I? And these kind of questions are legitimate questions. The next step is that how do we get to the answer to this question? What am I? I mean, this kind of question demanding a definition. And when that happens, I often ask myself, how do I define myself? What is Jin Park? I don't know. I cannot answer this question. Jin Park is myself is a combination of all these different things. But even that, I don't know how to define myself. And usually when people are asked about who are you? What are you? Then they kind of combine all this kind of background information. I'm a woman. I was born in Korea. I lived in US longer than I lived in Korea. I'm a professor. I'm this, I'm that. But combination of all these things really is not the same as putting that together and make one big answer. They kind of the logistics, collaboration of all of them make something different. What it means is that we are all process philosophy. We are all in the process of existence. We are not just being, even though each and every moment we exist. Our existence is always already a kind of becoming, right? From past, present, and future, but all these three time slot, time period work together at this moment. And I believe this is Buddhist concept of karma or dependent co-arising. So third way that goes beyond the good, right and wrong, or good and bad, is really to think about what we are aiming for. Why do we want to have an answer to certain question? So you repeat that phrase, that questioning the question. When I ask something, do I really need a direct answer? For example, if I was looking for a direction to get to somewhere, I do need some clear answer. But in many cases, the questions we ask in life is not like that. For example, even going to where you are from where I am, there are many different ways of getting there. I can fly, I can drive, can I drive? I can drive, I cannot swim all the way there, but there are different ways of getting there. The same is the case in various different situations, and that's why it's how is important. How is not just a method, but I believe how is a kind of demand to pay attention to our relationship to the questions we are asking. As you know, in the first Gong'an, Zhao Zhimu, the students who asked, does the dog have a Buddha nature? The students knew the answer. Yes, it does. That's a correct answer. If you know the answer, why do you ask? The students want you to confirm. And by confirming, what do you want to do? You want to tell yourself, I know the answer. So what does it do? And this is what situation. How situation is, why do you want to know that? Why do you want to confirm that? What does it mean to you? What is its relation to yourself? And that's why I said that the relationship to yourself and the object of your inquiry is really important. Obviously, we need to know facts and things like that. But then if we are looking for real meaning and eventually what is called truth, I think this process is really important. And before we get to whatever has happened is right or wrong, we have to really trying to consider or pay attention to all these different kind of conditions and context. And I believe this is one of the most important teachings that Buddhism offers to us, what is known as a relational identity or dependent co-arising. This is the kind of the call to tell us that you have to look around yourself and see the relationship before you simply decide yourself or others what they are or who you are.
Indeed, yeah. The relationality of truth is such an important topic and so complex. And there's also a theme in your work about social justice, like your latest book that came out, Marginality, the Karmic Historiography Project in Imminent Frame, and I'll get back to your contribution to that. Hope to have time for your contribution to that later. That's a very interesting piece. So these questions of Buddhist relationality, entanglement, causes and conditions, put into conversation with important questions for our times. And one of the questions that you bring up, or one of the issues that you bring up, is truth is power. That's a theme, also a theme in your essay. And you point out there's empowerment, a sort of, I would read as benign empowerment through dedication to establishing truths and possessing meanings and values. So that's a sort of conventional project of philosophy to establish grounds for foundations for values that remain relatively stable for people who need stable ground and are maybe not comfortable with continual relationality and process. But we also have this, of course, glaring problem now that people are using power to make up truth for their own ends. So this you discuss in relation to the interesting case of Zhao saying, wash your bowls to the student who says, oh, master, please instruct me, please give me truth, foundation, values, power through that. And Zhao says, wash your bowls, famously. And you interpret this as saying anybody has the capacity to discover truth and also has power to control their life and produce meaning for their existence. So then you argue that realizing the ubiquity of truth is everywhere to be found, as in Zhuangzi's statement, it's in the ants and grass, it's in the shit and piss. The Tao is everywhere, the truth is everywhere. But then you relate this to the idea of actualizing equalities for all. So this is very intriguing to me, and of course, the big challenge. So this is a little bit of a, my coming from my own constant Kwato, koan, whatever, interrogation of myself. Do we need to ask, as part of our own questioning the question, who has access to this realization and actualization? Who's listening to these podcasts? Who's reading this book? Who's in our classrooms? Who are we engaging with? And is there equal access to that? And I think that that's, a kind of no, moo, woo answer. And is this an irresolvable part of the tension? Or what can we do? What might we think about doing about this access inequality relationally? How do you think about it in your own work?
Yeah, so that's another big question. It has a lot to do with, or this discussion that I presented in the chapter, and also this, the karma as active resistance piece, or even my bone marginality. I believe it has a lot to do with my personal experience, even though it does not, except for marginality book, it was not presented in that manner. What I mean by this is that when I say that truth is anybody has a capacity to find a truth, or truth is in everyday's activities, as Zhao said, wash your bowl. And truth is power, but then this power can also create truth. All this has to do with the relationship between center and margin. I used to say, I still do, that I'm an expert in being at the margin. I'm a woman in the patriarchal society. I'm an Asian in West-dominated world. I teach Asian philosophy in the academia, which doesn't often recognize Asian tradition as a philosophy, and so on and so forth. So I'm triple, quadruple marginalized in this world. Now, the question then is that if you are at the margin, what do you do? Are you just kind of stay there crying and being subservient to the power in the center? And that doesn't seem to make sense to me. And that's where I began to ask, how do we find the truth? Is truth really something that is presented to me? And then the person, the group, or that which present me the truth is those who have power. And I think that's why I was not I was not convinced that I understood the continental modern philosophy, because those the truth presented by that philosophy sounded to me like a truth presented by the white male Western ideas. And that was true. Actually, that was the truth presented. What kind of truth do I have in my life? What kind of truth other people might have? Is truth the same? It might. Ultimately, at the top of wherever, truth might be the same. There might be universal truth. But then, as I said in my chapter, we do not encounter truth as it is. Truth is an idea. When we encounter truth in a phenomenological way, in a phenomena, which is always already, to borrow Merleau-Ponty's expression, contaminated by life. So if that is the case, what do we do? Where is the truth? And in my work on Kimiria, Korean Zen Buddhist nun, I introduced this concept to narrative philosophy. If you really think about it, the differences between male philosophers' way of presenting truth or ideas and female philosophers of doing that, I do not want to, the kind of generalize this, but you see a lot of cases, women present their ideas in philosophy through a story of their life. And then mainstream philosophy would say that that's not philosophy. That could be literature. That could be history. That's not philosophy. But why is the case that women has more tendency of telling their ideas through narrative? Because most of ideas are created based on men's life experiences. Women usually do not have language to present their ideas through ideas. Therefore, a lot of cases they tell the story, or narrative. But as you know, that storytelling is one of the oldest way of human being used to find a meaning of what has happened in life. Something happened today to me, and I will kind of call my friend. You know what? This happened. Why would you like to tell the story? Because while you are telling the story, you are rearranging the story and trying to find meaning of that happening, that event. So in that sense, I see that in each and every this kind of occasion could be a moment for truth. That does not mean that we always kind of get to the awakening about the truth in each and every instant. But as Zhao Zhu said, the kind of simple activity like washing your bowl, which perhaps people do every day, could be the instant for truth's revelation. Now, you talk about the equality and equality of access and so on and so forth, the social justice. Definitely no, especially in this world of internet and social media who have access to this kind of medium. And the rate of access to internet, if you go to Africa, some African countries have something like 37% of accessibility to internet. I mean, if you do not have an access to internet in this world in 21st century, you are basically preemptively excluded from any kind of meaningful activities, meaningful ways to contribute yourself to the society and to the world. Now, do I have an answer to how to solve the problem? No, but I have ideas about what we need to do. And partly that was my idea in the karma as active resistance. We are scholars and we are also educators. That's the part of thing that we have. One of my colleagues once actually said, our weapon is classroom. And I think despite this violent expression, I believe that is true, right? As an educator, you can educate students in our classes, and then we can also reach out to the general public through various mediums, this kind of YouTube. I don't know how many people will watch this YouTube, but sometimes some people by accident tumble onto this one other YouTube and will have an opportunity to think about it. I don't think that watching or reading Gong'an once will create a big transformation, but every steps is possible through the accumulation of small steps. I truly believe that the revolution does not happen overnight, and especially in this kind of a situation when various institutions fail to do their job, grassroots kind of a grassroots resistance and activism or just awareness without using this great big expression activism really will make changes. And I do believe that. So that could be the first step of making or creating a better society or a little bit, just a little bit more equal and equitable society.
Mm. Indeed, yeah, I'm really on board with you on that, and I agree that our classrooms are, you know, a basis for what you refer to as epistemic resistance in the karmic historiography article, and I think we see this also in the Gateless Barrier article. The idea that, you know, by telling stories and in also questioning our own stories, questioning causes and condition instead of assuming that we know the causes and conditions, epistemically engaging with the multiplicity of conditions and the fact that we can't know all the conditions that go into a space or an event, including our classroom events. You know, as we know as educators, there's always surprises. You're never going to have a script that is going to be played out. The other agents in the room, the students, are going to get involved, and it's going to be an improvisation. So I feel there is a connection between what we do in our classrooms and the moments, however literarily they may have been crafted, the moments that we're seeing captured in the Wumenguan, this kind of emergence out of a whole complex of interactions. So yes, and you also point out, or to me, you're also pointing out that this involves practice on the part of the teacher, who is always a student, quite looking into your own relational conditions, looking into your own causes and conditions, your stories. So you mentioned again, sorry, the karmic historiography project about having this. I really like the way that you put it, breaking free from the small self, meaning the self constrained by social norms, and the true nature of the self as freedom, the capacity to exercise agency, transcend constraints imposed by external conditions, and become the creator of one's own existence. Mm-hmm. So this idea of the creator of one's own existence, I think we also see not discursively promoted through the koans, but by posing this breaking of the small self, which Jimmy refers to in the Huato practice, and this opening of the sense of wonderment, which I would also associate with creativity. It opens up these possibilities for different ways of living and engaging. So we've got the wash your bowls example. What other examples stand out for you among the koans or in any of your philosophical engagements for actualizing that creativity or wonderment, or breaking the small self and opening up the spaces for this relational process?
Right, so there are a lot of different koans, and then I discussed several of them in that chapter. And the first one Zhaozhou's Wuguan is so popular, and in Korean
Mhm.
Buddhist tradition as well. So many people meditate with the Wu. So it was
Mhm.
in some way too well known. On the other hand, I
Mhm.
spent a lot of time to um, think about that the killing of cat story because
Yeah.
of a
Okay,
sheer
I was
sheer kind
hoping
of
you would bring that in.
shockingness. And then I discussed this with several of my colleagues, Buddhist colleagues, and some people say that it actually happened. Other people say that no, it was symbolic. Whatever that is, I stick to my interpretation there, and then in the context of truth. Another koan that I didn't mention there was about uh, meditation. Who was it? Well, Zen master was doing a seated meditation, and teacher asked the students, what are you doing? And then the student says, I'm trying to obtain enlightenment. And teacher brought up the kind of broken tile and begin to rub it. And students ask, what are you doing? And then teacher says that I want to make it a mirror. And student says, well, how do you make a mirror? By rubbing a tile. And the teacher said, how do you obtain enlightenment? By sitting to meditate. This is
Mm.
totally directly going against the kind of idea of seated meditation lead to enlightenment. So this kind of real kind of shock therapy is the very beautiful
Mhm.
one for me. And there you see that you
Mhm.
confirm that there is no one perfect way of obtaining enlightenment. Meditation is one of the most well-known practice, not only in Chan tradition, but throughout
Mm.
entire Buddhist tradition. And in Chan tradition, Chan claims that they meditate so then they can obtain enlightenment, not even reading and write. And then this Janma says, how do you obtain enlightenment? By sitting and meditate. The idea is that you
Mm.
cannot make anything fixed. It all has to do
Mm.
with text and context and conditions and then situation. This kind of what I call shock therapy give you a moment
Mhm.
of a rethink about what you've been believing and realize the
Mhm.
aha moment. This aha moment is really something that Zen Buddhism, Zen Gongan tradition can offer us, especially
Mhm.
in this time we are living in, is we are so much getting into more and more input and output and the algorithm, and you input something, the ChatGPT will give you the answer. So input and output is so obvious that that doesn't even give an opportunity to experience this shock therapy moment. And I think
Mm.
Zen Buddhist teaching can even work in by challenging the problem of our expectation of just asking something and getting the answer. What is that for?
Mm.
What is that for? So, okay, you need to
Mhm.
write it on paper. Okay, you can ask ChatGPT and create a paper. What is that for? Getting a good grade. What
Mm.
is that for? Get a college degree. What is that for? Have a better life. But then does it
Mhm.
really match? Is your better life aligned with having the ChatGPT write your paper? So, in a way, to reflect upon each and every moment, which will be very difficult, but each and every moment of our action, to ask ourselves whether this is really the one we should do, the action that we should follow, whether this is really what aligns with the goals of life that we have in mind. And I think that that moment of reflection is really needed and more so in our time. And I think Zen Buddhist Koan tradition really try hard to facilitate that moment to individuals.
Mhm.
Obviously, each individual must have different goal that give the person this moment. But and I don't think that it should be the goan in the goan books. And that's where the
Mm.
wonderful bowl, the doing dishes can be your goan.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I like that. Or washing the cat's bowls. I like that. Um, combination of mundane and then you get across the point about mundane practice, realizing, actualizing, but also as you brought out now, the life and death matter. You know, that asking questions is a life, the grave matter, as they say in Zen. Just for those who may not have read the book, I'll read the life and death matter for the cat in the case 14. Nanchuan kills a cat. Master Nantuan saw that the monks from the eastern and western quarters were arguing over a cat. So he held it up and said, if any of you can say something about it, you save the cat. Life and death matter. If you cannot say anything, it will be killed. No one in the assembly could reply, so Nanchuan killed the cat. That evening, Jiaozhou returned from a trip outside the monastery. Nanchuan recounted the story to him. Jiaozhou took off his sandals, put them on top of his head, and walked out. Nanchuan said, if you had been there, the cat would have been saved. So, of course, then you go into the question, okay, why couldn't they say something? What's the problem here? And there's also then the question that a lot of people ask, well, what is it about Jiaozhou's response? Is it just that he responded at all? And so in relation to it's mundane, but every action is critical. Every action matters. Every questioning your actions matter. You have to act. You can't just sit there questioning your actions. You have to say something, do something. So sort of caught between that, yes, it's everywhere, and there is a particular demand for a response. How one thing I think about, how do we break our students out of the safety, or I'm doing it too, the safety of nodes, or having some kind of crutch to that demand for a response in the moment. How do we create that, trigger that without triggering them, without making them uncomfortable? Or is the discomfort that is shown or alluded to in these gongan, is triggering discomfort necessary in the process of bringing that into our world?
Yeah, I mean, there are various different ways that we can work with our students. And in our cases, especially, we teach Asian philosophy and religions, Asian materials, which most of our students, or at least my students, are not familiar with. They all grew up in the Western culture, and perhaps my course, my Introduction to Asian Philosophy, for example, is the only first time that they ever get engaged seriously, academically, with non-Western materials. And I think each discipline and each professor must have his or their own way of encouraging our students to get out of their comfort zone and accept a challenge. But in my case, on the first day of the semester in Introduction to Asian Philosophy or my seminar, I tell my students just to getting exposed to Asian non-Western philosophy in American setting itself is a political action. I say that's because you see that how much Western or non-Western materials or traditions have been marginalized, but they still have ideas. You might not feel comfortable at the beginning with these ideas, what they think as religion, philosophy, or all the things might be new to you. But being get exposed to these traditions, you have an opportunity to broaden your horizon. Then might give you to rethink about all this education you had and thought you developed within the context of the West or Western culture. And I think this kind of occasion is the beginning of opening up their comfort zone. And I think it's our responsibility to actually make sure that our students understand what is going on. This is what is going on, instead of just kind of teaching, this is what Asians have as a philosophy. And students say, this is not a
Mhm.
philosophy. This is a philosophy. You do not have to argue like this, but tell the students, discuss with the students where the ideas that this is not philosophy come from. And then we will see
Mhm.
that how our idea of philosophy religion is West-centered. In the same way,
Yeah.
how these ideas are male-centered, and so on and so forth. So we can actually introduce a lot of different ideas and limitations of current thought system through our teaching. So once again, I
Mhm.
think that my way of doing it is through my materials, which are mostly non-Western materials, or even Western materials, which are very much postmodern and deconstruction, which is challenging the traditions. So our job as an educator, as a professor, is really involves this kind of opening up of our students' horizon. And I do believe
Mhm.
this will have an impact on the future of our society and obviously their lives, hopefully.
Yeah. Yes. Well, that is my hope too. And certainly it's interesting to engage in this process. So I really appreciate your commitment to it and your faith in it. Um, so I want to pivot. We're going to be sort of running into our last 5 minutes here. Um, so there's another question I want to pivot to. So this is a conundrum for postmodern philosophers have been grappling with for a long time. Basically, the prisoner's dilemma. Like if you are seeing if you're engaged in relationality process, deconstruction, seeing the contradictions to your own viewpoint, being, actively engaging, contribute contradictions, responding in the moment, all of those things that are very hard to do. Um, and you're politically working with people who are at best thinking that they have an evidence-based platform for their immovable position, or at worst, just claiming one made up out of who knows what. How prisoner's dilemma, how do you get both people out of prison to engage if the methods and the processes are so radically different? I mean, there is a sort of east-west tinge to that, but I think we're now dealing with it on a global scale at multiple levels of um, social activity.
Right. So that's really
Sorry.
difficult. Yeah, that's really difficult. But at the same time, I'd like to think of one's own position. So suppose one is taking the position of Buddhist postmodern position, like mine.
Mm.
But to actually practice this myself is not easy. We ask all,
Yeah.
we write about this and we proclaim this and we emphasize the importance of this. I often ask how much of this do I actually embody in my life? Perhaps just a little.
Mm.
I try, but in actual real life, we are not always that much. I mean, we are not 100% activate or embody the kind of claims we are making. Then this
Mm.
realization could be the beginning of trying to understand others. It's a it's not easy, especially in this world where the world has been so much polarized. And the same, the United States or South Korea, two societies I'm familiar with, it's the same. Polarization is so great. In sometimes it's really all we can do is despair. I feel like despair, but then I think what we can do is really to reflect upon ourselves once again and try to reconstruct the other's position, and at least
Mm,
trying not to hate the other side. So I think
mm,
this is very much a Buddhist approach. See,
yeah.
even though you do not agree with the other side, and perhaps you really hate the other side at a certain point, but let's not really activate our hatred and then
Mhm,
trying to see that they have their own sufferings. I don't know how
mm,
far we can go or how long it's going to take to do this kind of work. But then another lesson of Zen Goan, such as wash your bowl or the
mm,
Zhaoju's ac action of putting the sandals on his head, which is totally absurd, is really to act. Whether it's a daily
mhm,
activities or whether it's some kind of a reaction to the situation, trying to get engaged with it without
mm,
without really despair totally or
mm,
without resulting to hatred. I think
mhm,
that could be one of the first steps, especially this kind of situation where we are in politically and socially,
mm,
where uh, absolute polarization really lead us to hate the other side. It's not even,
mhm,
it might not be easy to even not express hatred, right? But
mm,
trying to teach oneself to not to activate that hatred and trying to understand the other side is the first step of make any kind of progress if we would like to make progress. I don't know what progress mean in this case even so,
mm,
which means that we are kind of it feels like we are slowly falling into not pessimism, but certain kind of I don't know what's happening kind of situation, but still without giving it up. To think about the Gong'an's lesson in our time, 21st century. I mean, we read Gong'an or Buddhism with a big thing in mind, enlightenment. That's
mm,
far away, or I don't know how far it is, but in our century, 21st century, in this context, I think Zen Goan has a lot more to teach. In
mhm.
addition to enlightenment, if somebody is aiming for enlightenment, that's great. But even our daily life and this political situation, I think that Zen Goan gives us the kind of opportunity to rethink about ourselves and the situation we are facing.
Indeed. And this is seems like a good note to end. What I'm hearing, what you're saying is also the point about compassion, that at one point in the article you say that we're working on improving ourselves to reduce causes of suffering for ourselves and others. And of course, Buddha nature is salvific nature. The nature of a Buddha is only the care for the freedom and lack ending of suffering for other beings. So I take your reading of these Gong'an as tools for that, as a very hopeful note in perhaps dark times. So do you have any final words you'd like to add? Final admonitions to the assembly?
No, I'd like to thank Jimmy for really doing such a great job to create this volume readings of the Gateless Barrier, and then also
Mm,
creating this the YouTube kind of presentation, which is a great kind of which will give a great opportunity for people to access. And then thanks, Wendy, for organizing, hosting this dialogue. I mean, I'd like to really think about Zen tradition and Koan tradition in the context of our time. And that's what I believe
mm,
what I did or what I try to do in my
mm,
chapter. And not only it is the tradition, very, very old, more than a millennia old, but then something really that gives us a lot to think about. And especially when we face this situation of AI and ChatGPT. And I'm not saying that AI or ChatGPT are all bad, but then there is a lot of things that we need to consider. And as I reread my article, actually, I realized that there are a lot of things that Zen Buddhism and Guan can tell us about how we encounter this situation of artificial intelligence in our time and political situations, as you mentioned. So I hope that we continue to explore this ancient tradition in the context of our time. And I think there is a lot of wisdom that this text and this tradition tells us for today.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much. And I look forward to continuing to read your work. And I also thank Jimmy for producing this. And yes, let's carry on with working on our going on, whatever they may be. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And best wishes to everyone listening.